Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And without further ado, I'm going to invite the first speaker, Christian Wolmar. He's a rail historian, as many of you may already know. Um, he's the author of On the Wrong Line, How Ideology, Incompetence Wrecked Britain's Railways. And his latest book, The Liberation Line, The Last Untold Story of the Normandy Landings. Um, which you can find on Amazon, is currently on sale. Thank you so much, Christian, for joining us, and over to you.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry, I happen to be in Stuttgart Airport where I've been at a conference, and it's quite noisy. So I hope you bear with me. But I think this is a very important debate, and I did want to partake in it. I'm not going to be able to stay to the end because I have to go off and take my plane. You might ask why I didn't take a train here, and that's I just really couldn't make it in terms of the time. But let me just kind of make a few points about what was good about British Rail. And I wrote one of the other books I've written was called British Rail, A New History. And it really tried to uh, kind of put back together the proper account of the story of British Rail because I'm so tired of hearing about sandwiches and wrong types of snow, both of which are completely stupid, fatuous comments made by opponents of nationalisation. After all, that sandwiches thing is a particularly stupid thing because it's not a catering company; it's a transport company, and it was a pretty good one. So just I thought I'd just kind of very in the few minutes I've got pull together just three or four ideas about what British Rail was good at and why we have to kind of go back there. First of all, it brought track and train together. It was an integrated organisation, and that's the way that most railways in the world have been run, and it's the best way to run a railway. It's a kind of daft idea to kind of separate out the two, which was done in the interest of competition and really was something that was done by the Tories out of ideological reasons and made no sense. So that's the first thing. That's good news. It will be publicly owned and therefore no need to kind of cater to private interests and make a profit on certain aspects and so on. So that's actually a very important aspect. This is a publicly owned railway with public intents and public kind of aims. Third of all, it also is both a commercial and a social railway. So it does have a commercial side. It does actually have to market itself. It does actually have to ensure that it's bringing in as many passengers as possible, not only because we want people to travel in a more sustainable way, but also because they can then cross-subsidize the less well-used routes from the commercial aspect. So it's a commercial as well as a social organisation. Fourthly, British Rail made strategic decisions about the future of the railway, and it made a lot of very good ones, like, for example, electrifying the East Coast Main Line, reopening some lines, and so on. And we need the new GBR to think strategically about the railway. Other thing about British Rail, it was given a budget and it kept to that budget. Now, some people might think, oh, it just should have an unlimited budget. But actually, that was a very good discipline. And it made the manager of British Rail kind of operate within a framework that was tight and disciplined and make the right sort of decisions. And then there's some slightly kind of other aspects, but British Rail had a fantastic management scheme, a trainee management scheme, which really needs to be replicated. We need good people to be able to run the railways, and British Rail did a great job of training them. It also had fantastic marketing schemes. Let the train take the strain, all those kind of adverts that put the railways in a positive light. So again, something that Great British Railways has to pick up on. And then just finally, as the ideas that have come, it also had fantastic design. I mean, what is new GBR? What is the logo it's using? It's using a logo invented by British Rail 60 years ago with the kind of twin arrows. And that's absolutely a remarkable kind of thing in BR's favour, to show that it was brilliant at marketing as well as lots of other things. And finally, because I don't think it should be left out, remember it's a freight railway as well. And it's very important that it carries as much freight as possible and that we encourage freight use. And one last point, I've seen somebody's put open access on the chat, and indeed I quite agree. I think open access, although I think a few bits of it should be retained, it shouldn't be a priority. The railway, GBR, needs to be able to control the timetable, and to control the timetable, it shouldn't have to pander to open access operators who all they want to do is make a profit. So those are quick few thoughts which I hope stimulate debate.
Thank you so much, Christian. You kept to your time perfectly. You were 32 seconds remaining. And that's really, really important. You're giving us a fairly historical context. Obviously, you're a historian, and it's useful for us to know the things in the past that we can carry into the future. So that's really, really valuable. Thank you so much, Christian. The second speaker is Ellie Harrison. She's the founder of Bring Back British Rail. She's also the co-founder and chair of Get Glasgow Moving, a public transport campaign for Glasgow. Over to you, Ellie. Over to you, Ellie. You are on mute.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you very much, John Bosco, and to Christian, very inspiring. So, as John Bosco said, I'm a volunteer public transport campaigner. I'm based up in Glasgow, and I'm the founder of the Bring Back British Rail campaign, which was set up in 2009 to popularise the idea of bringing our railways back into public ownership. And as Kat mentioned, over the last few years, 7 of our rail franchises were brought back into public ownership due to the failure of the private companies that were running them. But the campaign was obviously over the moon when the new government was elected last year, with the commitment to set up Great British Railways, to reunify the track maintenance and the train operations. And in order to do this, it requires 2 pieces of legislation over the next couple of years. The first, the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Act, became law in November last year, and that was a very simple piece of legislation, which meant that each of the remaining 10 franchises would be taken back into public ownership by default when their contracts end over the next few years. So we were celebrating that at the end of last year by launching our privatisation departures board, so you can track down to when the next of those franchises will be brought back into public ownership, with C2C and Greater Anglia still left to go this year. So everything seemed to be going well until this was published in February. This is the consultation document, which sets out Labour's plans for the second, much larger piece of legislation, the Railways Bill, which will create Great British Railways, which now looks set to be introduced to the Parliament in the autumn. So whilst there's a lot of great sounding stuff in Heidi Alexander's foreword and in the introduction of this document, things like we're going to have a simplified, unified structure, we're going to have a single directing mind that will run our rail infrastructure and passenger services in the public interest. We're going to do away with the dozens of complex interfaces that currently hold the system back and strip away the layers of bureaucracy that have been ingrained during privatisation. This is all the stuff that we want. It's when you get into the detail of the document that you start to notice that are glaring contradictions between what Labour is saying and what they're actually proposing to do with this bill. So it all comes down to their completely misguided plan to try to maintain an ongoing role for the private sector in our railways. So this will be in rolling stock, in freight services. Neither of those things are touched by the bill at the moment, but also in open access passenger services and in ticket retail. And it's ticket retail that I specifically want to highlight, because all of my campaigning comes from a passenger perspective, someone who doesn't own a car, somebody who wants to be able to rely on trains and buses to get around. And like many of you, I'm sure, I just want to be able to walk up to the station on the day that I want to travel and know that I can buy a ticket that is going to be an affordable price. I don't want to have to plan months in advance to search around for the best deal, because that system that we have at the moment really puts people off from using the train. So in chapter 5 of that document, Labour say that they're going to reform the complex and fragmented landscape inherited from privatisation, and that they're going to consolidate the current train operator websites into a single Great British Railways retail offer over time. That all sounds great. But at the same time, they say they want to support and promote a thriving third-party retail market to drive innovation and further encourage competition in the future. And that, as I'm sure is precisely, it's innovation and it's competition that have created the complex and fragmented fares landscape that we've suffered during privatisation. It is simply not going to work. And it's specifically not going to work because it's impossible for one public body, for our new Great British Railways, to do two things. On the one hand, to set fares across the network, whilst also competing on a fair and open basis with independent retailers. The only way it can do that is if we preserve the really complex regulatory system which we currently have, and which Emily's going to talk about shortly, which prevents us from having the fully integrated railway that we want. But the crux of the matter is that we need cheaper fares. We need to fully integrate the railways so that all the profits stay in the system and can be used to cut fares. And we need to have fare policies that are designed to encourage more rail use to help us meet climate targets. With a fully state-owned railway, like in Austria, we can have something similar to their climate ticket, which is designed to help them meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement, and it costs around £1,000 a year for all travel on all public transport across the whole of Austria. And we can have something like the Deutschland ticket in Germany, which costs about £600 a year for all travel on public transport, apart from the intercity services. So just to conclude, our demand is that Great British Railways creates one publicly owned ticket retailer which can deliver simpler and lower fares, something which will encourage more and more people to use the train.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I don't know if you finished your sentence, but that was me being an authoritarian. Thank you very, very much for that really wonderful presentation. And hopefully somebody's going to ask a question about that later on in the chat, because I really like the examples that you pointed to, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to touch on some of them again. The next speaker is Emily Sullivan, who is the co-founder of the Association of British Commuters. She's also a researcher in equality and human rights law, and she's going to be talking about competition law in the railway system, something that Ellie already touched on a little bit. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you. Good to be here. Yes, I'm Emily Sullivan from the Association of British Commuters, and I'm here to talk about Great British Railways, why we need full public ownership in the social and economic interest. And to talk about this, I have to break the biggest taboo in the rail industry, which is competition law. Incredibly complex, but I'm going to try and make it simple because it's really important. So I'm just sharing my screen. Okay, so our campaigning on GBR began in February when the government published its consultation document, and we saw it had dropped its main statutory duties for social and economic benefits, accessibility, and environment. So all of these have been strongly supported by the public for years in previous consultations and long-standing commitments of the previous government. The new proposal was for a stripped-down, competition-friendly model for GBR. So that is basically something that now the details of that legislation are being fought out behind closed doors and under aggressive lobbying pressure from private companies. All of this is possible because, despite bringing the passenger operators into public ownership, the government has also pledged to drive competition, especially in open access rail services and ticket retail. So to do that, it has to continue with the same competition-based legal framework that we had under privatisation. Under this framework, GBR will be considered a market participant directly competing in the markets. Because it's also dominant in the market, it's going to be under a complex web of legal duties, actually to prevent it from favouring the public interest in its decisions, because that's seen as discrimination against private companies who claim a right to that market. So just to put that down, there is a fundamental opposition between competition and socioeconomic value. It spreads throughout the system. Where you have competition, you have restraints to prevent collaboration, which is seen as a bad thing. It's seen as anti-competitive. So this includes bans on information sharing, separate accounting, or even separate financial entities within a system, bans on cross-subsidy, meaning you can't take money from one part to fund and grow another. And strong competition regulation. So in this case, we have the Office of Rail and Road and the Competition and Markets Authority, and they're the cause of much fragmentation and problems. So just to give two brief examples from what the lobbyists are saying, on the third-party retail market, which is not just ticket retail, it's a huge emerging market for data and app development, lots of cross-network passenger functions such as assistance for disabled people, lots of important factors in that. So to look at the consultation response from the independent rail retailers, which are a lobbying group set up to lobby for the free market in this, they want GBR Retail as a separate organisation, banned from collaborating, sharing information, planning with the main GBR, bans on cross-subsidy, so it can't take funding from other parts to promote its own operations. So we can see from this example, the competition restrictions prevent the integrated policies for ticketing, fares, research and development is also thrown out to the free market and therefore not under proper public interest regulation. This
2
is
minutes remaining.
Okay. This is a real urgency right now. We really have to do something right now about this because the Minister for Transport is under pressure to put this GBR retail separated arm, and then we have a sort of public-private hybrid that can't properly be integrated for socioeconomic value and bring its profits back into the system to the extent that it obviously could. Referring to what Christian Wolmar just said about being an enterprise in itself that should bring profit back and use that to reduce fares. All of this is fragmented and prevented by the competition restrictions. Also open access, which is the biggest threat to timetable integration. And this is what GBR is supposed to do. It's supposed to integrate timetabling above everything else. But these restrictions will spread. So we can see from First Group's consultation response, it wants
1 more minute.
Much stronger competition duties for ORR. It wants ORR to issue the license instead of the government. It wants much less power over timetabling for GBR, fragmented sort of legal processes for GBR operators so they can compete even with each other, statutory duties to promote competition and removing the statutory powers of devolved leaders because, of course, it doesn't want the competition, right? So to conclude, if I have enough time, John Bosco.
30 seconds.
Okay, so repeal all competition clauses from rail legislation is a must. Replace that with a socio-economic model for GBR. including the socio-economic, accessibility, environment duties, and much more, an integrated ticket retail platform and fares policies, all new technologies to be publicly owned and regulated. And finally, reforming the ORR is crucial. It needs to be a public interest regulator, just responsible for safety, accessibility, passenger rights, and rail performance. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily. Sorry, 1 second. Somebody needs to stop sharing. Awesome. Sorry, I need to. Thank you so much, Emily. That was incredibly important. And in some ways, I think that's what's really at the root of all of this. If you don't scrap competition law, in effect, you're tying your hands behind your back and you can't achieve the goals that you've set out for yourself to achieve in the railway. So that's really, really helpful. Thank you so much for helping us understand that. Kat is supposed to come in next, but Emily already talked about a little bit of the impact of competition law with respect to open access and how that affects timetabling. So I thought it might actually make sense for Jonathan to come in now, because he's going to be talking about how public ownership enables us to have a streamlined timetable similar to what they have in Switzerland, which is, as we all know, the best railway system in the world. Jonathan Tyler is from Passenger Transport Network based in York, and he's an expert in railway timetabling. Over to you, Jonathan. Unmute yourself, Jonathan.
Is that unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Good. Okay, off I go then. A timetable displays the service that a railway offers to travellers. The current timetable is a mess. All sense of a national network has been eroded. Connections between trains are random, and in many cases, long waits at interchanges must be deterring people. Intervals between trains are erratic, and departure times vary so much that memorability is poor. Printed versions have all but disappeared. Journey planners are poorly designed, and the industry has shown little interest in addressing the problems and appears unconcerned about lost revenue. This dire situation is a consequence of the 1993 Railways Act, which introduced competition between train operating companies. The legislation ignored the strong ongoing challenge from other modes and necessitated a regulator whose approach is legalistic and whose decisions on access rights are incompatible with the complex task of planning workable timetables. Fragmentation of the industry exacerbated the problems, as did the arrival of profit-seeking open access companies. Before the election a year ago, the government set out a vision of a transport system designed to work in the public interest. Its forthcoming reform of our railway must deliver that, and there can be no scope for private companies. What Britain needs now is not marginal services on a few routes, but a comprehensive, integrated service of buses and trains that attracts travellers out of private cars to relieve congestion and to protect the environment, while securing good travel opportunities for those who have no car and should not be socially and economically disadvantaged in a caring society. This is about planning the optimal use of capacity. The specification for the rail network should be a mix of frequent services appropriate to the route and the places served, and each running at least hourly. Available daily from early morning to late evening. Repetition of readily memorable timings. Careful decisions based on rigorous research into demand about through services, and where they are not justified, logically designed connections at every interchange. Symmetry of services in the two directions. Bus networks complementing the railway with excellent physical and well-timed connections. presentation as a national service, providing for almost all journeys at an attractive price. High standards of layouts and signage to assist travellers throughout their journeys, especially the disabled and those unfamiliar with the system.
2 minutes.
All delivered under contract by nationally owned operators to common standards and perhaps supplemented locally by community interest groups, and the whole system designed to be highly reliable. This scheme would emphasise the public interest and seeks a balance between the ambitions for local services, the national importance of fast interurban trains, and the desirability of conveying more freight by rail. There would be no place for disruptive private companies. In making decisions constrained by the existing infrastructure, the process would highlight the case for enhancement. This primary task for Great British Railways, and I do not underestimate the technical challenge, would offset disillusion and excite interest in the new organisation and the transformation it offers. The relief of social isolation, ending the waste of competition, and the savings for the environment would justify it, as studies have clearly demonstrated. And we know how successful such a policy has been in supporting the trains and buses, and hence the communal life in Switzerland. If GBR sends a study team there, I know that they will be impressed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was really, really helpful. And obviously, I wanted to say that when we started thinking about this event, I wasn't quite sure if I could be gotten to be excited about timetabling. And I had a meeting with Jonathan, and it got me extremely excited about timetabling. And it's really, really helpful to have you here and to talk to people about what we can get with a fully publicly owned service that's able to plan and deliver a streamlined timetable that works for everybody. Thank you so much, Jonathan. The next speaker is Kat Hobbs. Kat Hobbs, as you will all know, is the director at We Own It, and she's going to be talking to us about making sure that passengers have a real voice in GBR. But she's also going to be touching on funding for the railway system.
Thanks, John Bosco. So yeah, I'm going to make 2 points within John Bosco's very strict timetable. And the first is about the passenger voice. So the government is talking about having a strong passenger voice. It's talking about that voice incorporating transport focus, which is the current passenger voice that I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't heard of, because it's not strong and it doesn't help us that much. What we want to see is a voice that is democratically accountable to passengers. Because if you think about unions, if you're a worker, you get to vote for your representatives in your union. You have that voice and you can elect people to represent you. But passengers don't have any kind of union. They don't have any kind of body that they can actually have any power over. So we think that's how it should work. Have a truly independent, democratically elected body. When you buy your rail ticket, that entitles you to vote in the elections for the people to sit on this body. And those are the passenger voice representatives who will sit on Great British Railways, both regionally and nationally. And they will be able to feed in on issues like accessibility, affordability, and more generally, we want to see meetings being open, data being available, passengers being able to feed in their ideas into the railway to make it better. But we think the core of it is, you know, we've seen how Transport Focus has operated so far. It's not particularly effective at being a voice for passengers. For example, we know that 3 out of 4 people want public ownership, but Transport Focus has never raised that issue, even though passengers have wanted this for a long, long time. So we want to see that kind of union body almost for passengers and that democratic aspect in there. The second point is that we need really good funding to make this railway successful. So we know that in Switzerland, they spend 477 euros per capita on their railway a year versus our 116. So you know, over 4 times as much, nearly 5 times as much on their railway. So we have to have the investment into the railway. We can't have a railway that is starved of funding, and we need to get the government to understand that and to really put the money in. And it ought to be a no-brainer, because every pound invested in the railway produces £2.50 in economic benefits. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but it's a crucial point. And I think, in a way, those two things that I've just mentioned go hand in hand. We need the government to understand that passengers are really a force to be reckoned with, that we should have our own independent say about this, that we really care about the service that we receive, and that in general, the people who use public services that is a voice that needs to be listened to, and that is a voice that needs to have power. And if we had that power, we would be able to push for more funding to be spent on the railway. So I think those two things go hand in hand as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. You were just on the 2 minutes to go mark. Thank you very much for those really, really important points. And everybody here on this call is basically a passenger. And this voice, this strong passenger voice, will enable everyone here to contribute their ideas, their thoughts, their experiences, crucially, of using the railway system into making sure that the railway is designed in such a way that it works for us. So thank you so much for those remarks. And finally, we have Dr. Grace Brown. She's a research associate at the Global Remunicipalisation. She's a research associate in Global Remunicipalisation. Sorry, that word is a bit difficult. And she recently co-authored with Professor Andrew Cumbers a report for ASLEF called A Public Vision for Financing Scotland's Railways. This is an incredibly important report. It's a report that I have relied on for a lot of my thinking on rolling stock over the last few weeks. It came out I think 2 months ago. And we have Dr. Grace here to talk to us about it. Thank you so much, Grace, for being here.
Great, thanks, John Bosco, and well done on the pronunciation of remunicipalisation. It only took me about 5 years of a PhD to be able to pronounce it off the cuff. And yeah, thanks to We Own It for having me here tonight amongst an excellent panel of speakers. So as John Bosco said, I'm going to be talking about rolling stock, which is the trains themselves. And it's this element of the railways, the trains on the tracks, that I think is often quite misunderstood when we think about nationalising the railways. And that's because the ownership of them is incredibly opaque. So most people, including myself when I started this work, are surprised to learn that the trains themselves aren't owned by rail operators. Instead, nearly all the trains in the UK are owned by just 3 private rolling stock operating companies, which I'll refer to as Roscoes throughout the rest of these next 5 minutes. And Roscoes were created during the rail privatisation of the 90s, with the idea being that competition would lead to increased investment and better services. But as all the other excellent speakers have shown, it's competition itself that has often brought so many issues. And the problem when it comes to rolling stock is that Roscoes don't run services. They don't build trains. They just act as a middleman, leasing trains to operators at a premium for profit. So up to 25% of every rail ticket sold goes straight to Roscoes. And over the last decade, about £2 billion in profits was handed over to shareholders, which works out about £262 million in dividends every year. Roscoes have also seen their profits skyrocket over this time. In 2022 and 2023 alone, their profits tripled to over £400 million. And still, the average age of rolling stock in the UK is nearly 17 years old. And that's because as middlemen, Roscoe's commercial interest is in keeping their existing fleet running as long as possible, rather than investing in new stock. And this also leads to a situation where Roscoe's sometimes scrap trains rather than absorb the cost of maintenance or storage when idle, with trains coming off lease that don't have a guaranteed future use, sometimes being scrapped rather than paying for the high cost of storing it. And this has led to some real travesties, including the Heathrow Connect electric trains, which were actually destroyed because they were taking up so much price in storage, meaning much older diesel stock has continued to be used. So who's paying for new trains? Often it's not the Roscoes, but the public, it's us, through expensive private finance deals like PFIs and special purpose vehicles, which are complex public-private contracts where trains are ordered directly by the government, but the financing, ownership and management is left in private hands. And these models are also extremely expensive. PFIs and other sort of private finance deals can cost up to 70% more than if the government simply borrowed the money directly to purchase the trains themselves. And it's important to note, I think, that the UK is the only place in the world with such a system. And it really is a completely dysfunctional system. It's not a functioning market. It's a cash extraction machine where public money is routinely siphoned off for private profit, leaving passengers with higher fares, older trains and worse service. Now, a public model for owning and financing trains would reinvest this money into better, greener and more affordable rail for everybody. And this really isn't abstract savings. So Merseyrail shows what public train ownership can deliver. The Liverpool City region bought 52 brand new electric trains in-house. They cut energy use by 80%. They boosted accessibility through state-of-the-art upgrades to carriages and platforms, which revolutionised rail travel for wheelchair users and other passengers who need assistance. The deal supported 1,000 jobs and will ensure that profits stay local, being reinvested into the network rather than extracted for private shareholders. So I think this is just a really nice case study of a public success story. And we go into it a little bit more in the ASLEF report. And I think that's really what a Great British Trains company that purchases rolling stock could do. Instead of 25p from every pound going to Jersey or the Cayman Islands, that money could invest in new accessible trains so that disabled and elderly passengers are not left behind. It could support a highly skilled, unionised rail workforce, building and maintaining trains here in the UK. And critically, we can cut carbon faster, get into that net zero rail network by replacing that really outdated diesel stock with modern electric trains. And I think what's been great about this event is showing how much public ownership must mean full ownership of track, of services and of rolling stock. And Great British Trains could hopefully be the mechanism to do that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Grace. That was incredibly eye-opening for me, and I've been reading a lot about rolling stock for a while myself. So we're going to quickly stop highlighting. Awesome. Well, we are finally out of the speaking phase of this. Of course, we're going to come back to the speaking phase of it. We've picked out some incredibly great questions in the chat that we're going to come to later on. But we wanted you to take action immediately. Obviously, you've been hearing from all of the speakers, all of the ways that we can make sure that public ownership of rail truly delivers for passengers rather than for the shareholders who have been sucking our railways dry for the last 30 years. And the purpose of this really is that you've just spent the last 30 minutes hearing about the ways that we could make sure that public ownership of rail delivers. A lot of MPs don't know this. They just think that public ownership is happening in rail and it's going to deliver, right? So it's really important that we take this information to our MPs now. We've organized an MP drop-in session in Parliament. All of these wonderful experts who have just spoken here are going to be in Parliament in September to speak to MPs. And this email that you will send to your MP is going to invite them to attend that session and listen to this really important advice that these experts have just been talking to us about. And now we're going to jump into the Q&A. I saw a brilliant question that I wanted to ask because it was a fairly challenging question that I thought the speakers would like to get their teeth into. David asked a question about open access. He said, open access has restored services to London from Sunderland, Halifax, and much more frequent services from Hull, all of which were cut or neglected by British Rail. I'm not against GBR, but allowing open access operators to continue is very much in the public interest. No, I don't work for Arriva. David, we don't think you work for Arriva. It's a really, really important question, and it's important for our experts to respond to it. Can I come to who wants to take that? Ellie, do you want to take that? Yes, Ellie.
Yeah, I'll just make one simple point, and that is, well, Kat and I were involved in the campaign on the East Coast main line to keep the East Coast main line because it was running public ownership for about 3 years up until it was reprivatized in 2015, I think. And during that time, it returned nearly £1 billion to the Treasury in profits, because it's the mainline services like the East Coast Main Line, the West Line Main Line that make profits for the railway. But since the Lumo service, which is an open access service which runs from Edinburgh to London, was launched by First Group at some point during the pandemic, over the last few years, East Coast is no longer making a profit, because all of that profit is being sucked out by First Group. So this is one of the key problems, that the open access operators say, oh, well, we just run commercial services, we don't require any subsidy, but they are sapping money out of the system. So that is a really good reason to scrap it. But from a fares perspective, you know, I talked a lot about we just want one publicly owned ticket retailer. We want it to remove this complex web of fares and ticketing and different websites that we have at the moment, simplify everything. We're not going to have that if we continue with open access, because Lumo is going to have its own website, it's going to keep selling its own fares. The other open access operators, Central Trains, Hull Trains, they're all going to have their own websites selling their own fares, and GBR will have absolutely no control over that. So it's mad, it's completely counter to the aims of reunifying the railways and simplifying the system. So it has to be stopped.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And something that's really important to mention as well is that open access, and just to explain to those who are not very familiar with the term, open access is when private companies identify one stretch of kind of track that's appears to be available at a given time, and then they want to run a train on it. And obviously, they extract a whole bunch of profit from that service. That is only less than 1% of the railway system, but it extracts hundreds of millions of pounds that could go toward improving the whole service for 99% of us. And of course, if we had a little bit more time, I'd go to Jonathan actually, because it's also really important because it undermines timetabling. And it creates a situation that undermines the quality of the service that everyone else gets, right? So it's really, really important to recognize that. I think that it's important as well to say that we can take them into public ownership, right? In a lot of these cases, the solution is not for them to disappear. The solution is for them to be fully integrated. And for that to happen, it needs to be taken into public ownership. We have another question from Michael, who says, is there anything stopping GBR from procuring trains directly, or are they required to go through Roscoe's? And I'll put this to Grace.
Yeah, great, thank you. The short answer is no. There's no sort of legal or technical requirement that would force Great British Railways or any public body to procure trains through Roscoe's. The UK's use of Roscoe's and private rolling stock finance isn't really based on economic necessity or legal obligation. It's a political choice shaped by Treasury rules and sort of broader ideological commitments to market-based models. And those choices were often made to sort of keep investment off the books, like outside of public borrowing, but not because public procurement isn't feasible or effective. So nothing would stop GBR from procuring trains directly, owning them outright, or setting up a public rolling stock company. And that's actually why Merseyrail in the Liverpool City region were able to sort of circumvent using Roscoe's and procure directly. And also TfL in London rejected the private finance model as well when planning the Crossrail system. And TfL opposed it because it like poor value for money and high costs. And they directly purchased 65 new trains, I think, themselves, and set up its own company to do so. So I think that's what's really important. Like, the examples are here in the UK already, you know, and I think it's just about scaling that up outside of city regions to the national level.
Thank you. That's really, really important. And I did just want to jokingly add, do you know who the socialist mayor of London who rejected that private open access, not open access, private rolling stock contract? It was Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Look at that. He was even smart to this one. Somebody asked in the chat, Ben said, will the presentation slides be available to everyone on the call? That's a good question for Ellie and Emily. But I just wanted to use that as an opportunity to say that you will be able to find a YouTube video for this because we're recording it on the We On It YouTube channel. You can just go on there and search for We On It and find our channel. And if Emily and Ellie send over their slides, please do email us at info@weonit.org.uk and ask for it and we'll provide it to you. Thank you so much for that. I wanted to read a few comments that are not really questions, but I thought they were quite useful contributions to what has been said. Ashley from Oxford said, more efficient operation and sensible management of infrastructure. Nationalized companies are far better subject to good leadership. And that's really important, that we're not just essentially saying, bring it in and it's going to work itself out. We're saying, bring it in and here is how you should make sure it works for people. Local government 40 years ago was very efficient and we can return to that common sense approach. Thank you so much, Ashley. David says, end open access train operating companies, bring back intercity and regional railways. I want to pull up a question. Ibrahim says, so cool to see everyone getting involved. My question is, sorry if already asked, is there any way to implement protections that would prevent railways from going back to private ownership? Who wants to take this one? Kat, do you want to?
I'd like to bring Emily in just really briefly, if you can, Emily, and then I'll wrap us up and we'll try and finish on the hour as we promised. It's just so much going on here, which is brilliant. But yeah, does that work for you, John Bosco?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Really important. I'm also really worried about this. So I think the best answer is, what I've said earlier, if we repeal competition law now, it has to be that's replaced with really strong socioeconomic duties explicitly for GBR and the regulator ORR. And I think once you've created that integrated system where the finances are fully together, we know all the profits are going into fund and grow the network. You've got the best possible arrangement, the best possible set of incentives for the government to invest. And when you have the best possible set of incentives, you're going to get the best investment and the best, I think after that happens, if we can just get to that point, why would you ever go back? Because the proof will be obvious. So that's what I'm hoping. But there are various other thoughts, such as devolved leaders could have a sort of golden share so that they could object if it was ever reprivatized. But we do need to talk a lot more about that issue. It's really important.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily. And I'm going to hand over to Kat to close us off.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, John Bosco, our station master. You've been fantastic. And to Hugo and John. And I think our speakers this evening have just been phenomenal. We were really excited to bring you all together, a never before seen combination. Can we have a round of applause for these fantastic speakers? Do an emoji, clapping, whatever works. I know it's not the same as being in person, but we're just absolutely thrilled to have these very informed experts in the room, and that they'll be in the room in Parliament where MPs can talk to them, and we'll set up a kind of train, carriage by carriage. They can go around and talk to these brilliant experts and understand what's really going on. And so thank you so much to all of the speakers. And I wanted to also say, we've just got such phenomenal questions and thoughts in the chat. What we'll do is if someone in the team can save that chat, we will use your comments and questions as prompts for content on our YouTube channel and social media in general. But we'll try to delve into some of these things in a bit more detail, because some of your questions like, well, can we take over Trainline, or, what can we do to keep the private sector out? They really deserve more time. So we really appreciate all of your questions, and check out We Own It's YouTube channel. We'll be on there with some of these experts and try to answer some of these questions over the coming months. Thank you for taking action. Absolutely brilliant. And if you haven't yet, you can personalize that email to your MP. Thank you to everyone for being here, and also everyone who donates to We Own It to make this work possible and to make this campaign possible. Thanks to Bring Back British Rail and Ellie. Thank you to the Association of British Commuters and Emily. Thank you to Dr. Grace Brown, and of course, Jonathan Tyler and Christian Wolmar, who's left but is involved. And so, yeah, so thank you to you and your organisations. And thanks to everybody for being here. If you are not already part of We Own It, you can join our mailing list on our website. And every Thursday lunchtime, we have a sort of quick fire session like this, which is just half an hour, 12:30 till 1 o'clock on a Thursday. We talk about what we're campaigning on, we get you involved, we take your comments and thoughts and questions, and we have a discussion. And so if you enjoyed this session, we have a short and snappier session on a Thursday lunchtime, and you can sign up for that on our website, and we'd love to see you there. There's about 30 people that come every week. And I just finally wanted to say, there was a comment from Gareth who said that this government is so contradictory. And that is exactly what they are. And you'll notice that on rail franchises, they're doing some public ownership, but on water, they're ruling it out. On the NHS, they're all over the place. Same with energy. So that is why We Own It exists. And that's why we're here, to actually hold their feet to the fire. And you've been doing that tonight by learning about what's really going on here. Where is their public ownership? Where is there not public ownership? How can we make sure that we as passengers, as workers, as the public, get the kind of service that we deserve? And you've brought so much energy and attention to this for the last hour. So we really appreciate you for being here, and we hope you enjoyed it. We hope you got something out of it. We hope you'll stay involved and campaign over this over the coming months. And thank you so much, everyone. Round of applause for yourselves, please.